Now I have here something y'all can. It's a very, very little simple thing. Jerry, you need to start making some of these, okay? You can do this, huh? I'm going to tell you. In the book of Numbers, does everybody see it? Very simple little thing, and you can pass it around, and we're going to make some of these. And in the book of Numbers, we see over in chapter, what was it, Alex? Chapter 15, is that it? Chapter 15, verse 38. I believe I'm correct. We see that the Israelites, the Jewish people, were commanded a lot of things. They were told things that they needed to do. Now, I want you to understand this. The Old Testament is a picture of the church. I don't care what anybody says. The Old Testament didn't have the church, but it was a picture of the church. Everything in there deals with what we're to deal with today. In the book of Numbers, chapter 15, somewhere in there, I think verse 38, the command or the desire that the people would do this, not necessarily a command, but they were to take these little things, the little tassels, the little ribbon, and if you notice it's got blue in there. The blue was to signify the commandments that God had given His people. And they wore a thing, what would we call that today? A smock, a poncho? They had their dress on, if you would. The men and the women wore the same thing. And it was a dress. And they would put this poncho on, and they were commanded to put one in each corner. One on this corner, one on this corner, one back here, and one over here. And every time they looked at it, they would see the blue, and they would be reminded of the commandments that God had given them. Now, God gave us commandments that will never, ever change. In the book of Exodus, He gave us the 10 Commandments. Now, we could look at those, and they're pretty simple. There's some of that stuff in there that God didn't even need to tell you because you know it anyway. Do not kill someone. Nobody ever had to tell me to do that. I just knew there was just something inherently wrong with taking someone else's life. That's called murder. I knew the first time I stole something that it was wrong. I knew how to keep you a bookmark with that. I knew that telling a lie about stealing it was wrong. I knew all of these things. I knew that what someone else had was theirs. And I had no business with it. I had no business even desiring it. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying, that person's got a beautiful car, beautiful truck, beautiful house, I like it. Nothing wrong with that. It's when you start desiring it and it gets to a point that you say, I've got to have that, I want that. But God told the Israelites, He said, every time you look at this, remember your commandments. We're still commanded, even though we're in the age of grace, we're still commanded to do certain things. I have people tell me, and I know this is true, that we're to preach the word, to be instant in season and out of season. We're to tell the truth. Today we're living in a society that preachers don't do that. Preachers want to be cool. And you've noticed I've started wearing a shirt and tie. Well, I wore a shirt every time I've ever been to church, every time in my life. But I wear a jacket and a tie. And the reason I do that, God began to deal with me about maybe I need to look a little different. I don't need to be the cool kid, you know. And a lot of preachers are that. They're the cool kid. They wear the jeans with the knees out, you know, the Eddie Van Halen look. And that's not what God called me to do. So maybe I need to come apart and be a little bit separate, so I dress this way. There are certain things in our lives as Christians we need to do. So in the book of Numbers, and if you'll notice the title that we're looking at today, is the Bamidbar. The Bamidbar. And if you looked on that, I'm sure you said, what in the world are we talking about today? Is he talking in an unknown language or what's going on? This is simply the Hebrew word that means wilderness. Now, if we were to properly give the name to the book of Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that's the first 5 books of the Bible called the Pentateuch. This is also known as the book of Moses, the first 5 books of Moses. But the real name, and the word Numbers there was given in the Greek and the Latin, the English. Everybody changed it to be Numbers because in verse 2, God says, number the people. I want you to set apart these people out of the congregation. So we call it Numbers. But the actual name is Bamidbar, and it means simply this, in the wilderness. And they were in the wilderness. Keep in mind, when you see the word desert in the Bible, it doesn't necessarily mean the sandy, the big sand dunes and no vegetation. It just means a place that is separated. Remember, it said that Jesus went up into a desert place and they sat down on the grass. Now, you don't have grass out in the desert, in the barren place. But now there are places in this wilderness journey that was just barren, like the wilderness of sin. There was just nothing there today. And we get this book of Numbers from this numbering in verse 2. And if you would, I want you to read along with me, and we're actually, what we're going to do, we're going to have a study in the book of Numbers, but we're not going to go verse by verse by verse, because if we did, we'd have to list a lot of names and how many and all of this stuff. But we're going to go through it maybe a chapter at a time. But there's some things in here, and we're going to go forward, and then we're going to come backward in our study in the book of Numbers. The book of Genesis, you remember, was the book of beginnings. Now, it may help you if you latch on to these definitions a little bit. The book of Genesis, and we use that word today. Genesis simply means a beginning. Genesis was the book of beginning. And then you have Exodus, which saw the Egyptians have the Israelites in bondage, and God made them exit Egypt and go up on their trip to the Promised Land. And that's what they're doing here. And then the book of Leviticus simply gives us the true nature of worship and holiness and cleanliness. It's all spelled out in the book of Leviticus. And then Numbers focuses on the Promised Land. That's what they're trying to do in the book of Numbers. They're trying to take a trip that only took a matter of days into the Promised Land that took 40 years. And they're trying to work their way around in the desert. And they'll go up there and they'll come back and they'll go over there and then they'll fight a war. And then all of these things happen to show the church some things. And of course, the book of Deuteronomy tells us about faith and obedience. Now, if you apply all of these things to your life, you had a beginning, you were delivered from sin, and then God wants you to go into holiness, the book of Leviticus. He wants you to know holiness, and then He wants you to focus on the land. That's what we're doing today. If you've been a Christian any time at all, you're to focus on the land. What's going on out here? Who's unsaved? Who's unchurched? Who can help us to build the kingdom of heaven? And then Deuteronomy, we're to learn faith and obedience. And this is something that the church is lacking desperately today, is faith and obedience. We see the churches, the numbers going down. I heard a new Barna survey, and it's very depressing if you hear that, about how many people believe in God, believe in the biblical truths. People don't even believe in the Ten Commandments anymore. They believe that murder is okay, and we're seeing it by the millions as people go to the abortion clinics today. And there's two denominations that are hand in hand today, and they're going around blessing. Now listen to this. 2 mainstream denominations going to abortion clinics to lay hands, if you would, and give their blessing on the murder factories. Now that ain't right. That ain't right. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. And I want to try to give you some things here very quickly. We don't have a lot of time. And there's some things here that is so important. I want you to remember this also, that the wilderness journey was a form of punishment because of their disobedience, but it was also a training time. It was a time to teach them some things that they would carry over into the promised land. And it became a time of training more than punishment. And we have the first verse. We're going to break it down into some little sentences, if you would. And the first thing that I want you to notice there, and the Lord spake unto Moses. Now in Leviticus, let me read you the first verse. I'm going to have a hard time with this because I'm trying to take a verse here and a verse here and try to get it all in one time. But listen to this. This is Numbers chapter 1 and verse 1. And, now that word and links Leviticus and Numbers together. It picks up right where Leviticus left off. It leaves off and then and is said. Now listen to the book of Leviticus chapter 1 and verse 1. And the Lord called unto Moses and spake unto him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Numbers 1:1. And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of the congregation. You say, well, Moses wrote both books, so they're going to be similar. Listen, God dictated to Moses what he was to write. This is here for a reason. Keep this in mind now. In the tabernacle, out of the tabernacle. And the Lord spake, and anytime we see God speaking, we see that salvation is about to come about. Remember the lesson last week, salvation. What is salvation? How has God given us salvation? What do we need to remember about salvation? But anytime you see the words, and the Lord spake, we're about to see salvation begins with God speaking that. This is where redemption comes in. Remember, we were redeemed by the blood of Jesus. And he spake in the wilderness, in the tabernacle of the congregation. Then look at verse 2. Take you the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel, after their families, by the house of their fathers, with the number of their names, every male by their polls. Now the word poll there is simply take a number. You remember that we used to have a poll tax that we had to pay to go vote. That was just simply taking a poll of who could vote. They would just write your name down. That's what they're doing here. He says, take a census, or take the number, or take the sum, And this word, take the sum, literally means the raising of the head. It means to go and take that person, raise their head, look at them real good, and if they're above a certain age and below a certain age, you write them down. This is the draft. This is the draft for the army. Now, I've never won anything in my life. I'm going to be honest with you. I've registered for raffles. I have bought tickets for things. I've never won anything. Never won anything. And then in 1970, there was a little thing going on called Vietnam, and I happened to be like 19 years old, and they said, I think, well, they had the draft. I had to go down and register. I had to get a little card. I had to take that card with me at all times. Now, I was very lucky because they would pick and choose who they got. And I don't know how they picked it. They went by your birthday, your driver's license. I don't know how they did it. And then they said, well, we're going to have the lottery system, and we're going to put everybody in there, and we're going to draw names. And guess what? I won. I won the opportunity to go to Southeast Asia. And they said, well, and it wasn't, they wanted me to go. They said, you are going. You're on your way. We're going to send a bus to Decatur. You come to Decatur, get on the bus, and we're going to give you a bus ride down to Montgomery. I got on that bus, and I was scared to death. Not because I thought I was going to have to go to Vietnam, but because these two Continental Trailways buses were racing. I thought we had Darrell Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt, and it like just scared me to death. And I thought, well, I have no problem going to Vietnam. I survived this bus ride to take my physical. And this is what God was actually telling right here. He said, I want you to get all these guys that are 20 years old that can serve in the army, one out of every tribe. Remember, there were 12 tribes here. And of course, there was 2 out of the children of Joseph, because the Levites couldn't fight. They were to be the priest in the temple. And we're going to see the reason for that just in a moment. And he said, and some of the Jewish scholars says it's people between the men between the age of 20 and 60. Now, I think it's more like between the ages of 20 and 50 that could actually participate in going to war. And he said, number them that they can go forth into war. I want you and Aaron to number these people and get, first of all, a representative of every tribe. Pick you a man that's going to be over this. And you see, the Lord spoke to Moses. Does God speak to us today? He definitely does. Does God give us anything new? No. Because if God gives us anything new, then we're going against the Word of God, because the Bible says in the book of Revelation, cursed is the man that adds anything to this book or takes anything from this book. But God will let you know things if you will speak to Him. He will open your eyes and let you see things, and He will give you revelations of things that you're to do. But it won't ever go contrary to this Word. And it says here in the Bible that He spoke to Moses. He told him these things because he was his friend. It said that He talked to him mouth to mouth. He stood right before him. They could see each other's mouth moving. It said that He spoke to Moses over in the book of Exodus 33. He spoke to Moses as you would speak unto a friend. And then over in Numbers 13, he said, I spoke to him mouth to mouth and face to face in Jeremiah, and his eyes should behold His eyes. So He was that close. You say, boy, that must have been something to be somebody that important that God would love you face to face. Listen, we are. We are that person. God loves us face to face. And He said, I want you to number these people. And we're going to have wars over here. We're going to see some things happening in this country, so we want this army to be ready. Now, we live in a country that has an army that's ready to go to war at any time. I hope that we never have to go to another war, but, that possibility exists. And we see that as the Israelites go on a little further, that God says, I want you to send some people over into the promised land. I want you to go over there and spy this place out and see what's going on over there. Does everybody know this story? All right, let me give it to you let me give you the cliff notes on this. There was a group of people, children of Abraham. They were known as the Israelites. Their names were changed to Israelites. They became known as Jews because they were from the tribe of Judah or whatever. They were put into captivity for 450 years. They stayed in the land of Egypt. Egypt on the map was down here, They were there, and then God said, I'm going to raise up someone to take my people out. This is my people. But yet I've had them in bondage for all these hundreds of years. It's time that they come out. And right up here, 11 days away by foot, was a place called Canaan. God said, I'm going to give you this place. It's going to be wonderful. So they went and they started on their journey, and sure enough, along on their way, they started grumbling. God sent Moses up the mount to get the Ten Commandments. He come down, they'd built the calf. Listen, I don't know how Moses did this. 40 years he put up with those people. 40 years he put up with grumbling and complaining, and it was like being the pastor of a church, I guess. There was just so many things he had to contend with. Do you realize the tenure of a pastor these days is just very low? Two years or less in most cases, people, and they think, well, listen, it's not working at this church, so I'm going to resign and I'm going to go over to this church and everything will be great. Hey, it don't work. You know why? Because people was in this church and people are going to be in this church. Moses, listen, to his glory, he stuck with these people 40 years. Do you realize Moses could have just went on over into the promised land until he disobeyed God? He could have just went on over and said, phooey on y'all, I'm going over there. But then they murmured, they complained, and then they got right up to the banks of the river to cross over. And God says, send out a man from every tribe, send out 12 men over there, and just check the land out. They went over there and stayed for 40 days. 40 days they stayed in that land. They came back, all 12 of them. Nobody harmed them. Nothing happened to them. God's protection was on them. They came back and they had a cluster of grapes. This cluster of grapes was so big that it said they put it on a pole, put it on one man's shoulder and on another man's shoulder, one little cluster of grapes that they cut off, and it drug the ground. And I believe it drug the ground, and I believe the man behind had to walk like this to keep from stepping on them. I believe it just drug the bottom grapes completely off. They got back. 10 of them said, can't go over there. Man, there's giants in that land. You got the Amalekites, you got we can't go over there. Those people will eat us for breakfast. Man, you got the Amalekites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Canaanites. We can't go up against them. But Joshua gave a good report. He said, yeah, we can. He said, we can go over there. We've got God on our side. We didn't see anything over there that could harm us. Nobody over there is stronger than we are. But then you had these 10 complainers over there. But we've got the Amalekites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Canaanites. We can't defeat them. And here was Joshua. Joshua was saying, we can do it. And his buddy Caleb was saying, sure can, sure can. Listen, folks, we're all in the wilderness. God left us in the wilderness. He saved us. He brought us forth out of bondage by His Son Jesus. But He left us here in the wilderness. So, well, I've got it pretty good. It's going to be 90 degrees, 87 degrees today. I've got an air-conditioned home. My automobile is air-conditioned for the ride home. The seats are plush. I've got a widescreen TV, and I can go home, eat good food. I've got it made. But listen, we're still in the wilderness. We're not there yet. We're not in the promised land. Listen, when I go to buy grapes, I've got to pick through them, and sometimes they're the little bitty little grapes that are not too good, Man, I'm looking forward to them grapes off the tree of life that drags the ground. And you go get you one or two of them, there's your meal. And they complained and they murmured and they give an evil report, and they brought it back to the land which they had searched. And God said, okay, What am I going to do? I've told you what I want. I want you to inhabit the land. God's telling us today, I want you to live the good life. Better than being in this wilderness. You say, one day we're going to cross over that river. And people will tell you, the Bible scholars will say, well, the promised land is not a picture of heaven. And I agree to a certain extent, but it is. It is. Because one day we're going to cross that river and we're going to live eternally in the promised land. We're going to live forever. What we do down here doesn't matter. It matters only what we do for Christ. Because we're not going to live in this land very long. So I plan on living to be 115. Good. What is your life, though? My book says that your life's just a vapor. I don't care how old you live to be. It's just a vapor. It's just here and gone. You live for a little bit and it's gone. And when you get to heaven, what are you going to have to show for it? Only what you've done in the wilderness. And here's the people. And you know, it's very easy to get a riot going. All you got to do is have 10 of the 12 people out there saying, boo, boo, boo. And the rest of the crowd will go along with it. And they did here. And they said this. They said, I wish to God that we'd have died in Egypt. And you know, we've got things told over and over in here, and it's not necessarily right here in this verse, but they said, they're over in Egypt, they had the flesh pots. We could just eat all we wanted. They had the melons and the cucumbers and the garlic and all of this good stuff. And they even said there's no graves in Egypt. Listen, by the very name, by the very nature of that word, it means the graveyard. But yet they had forgotten and they said, let us go back there. That was a good place to be. And we have Christians today that get saved and they go right back into Egypt. And they forget that it's the land of death. You see, when we're saved, and I'm going to tell you this again, so many people, so many preachers, so many people that are out soul winning will come to the lost and say, how would you like to live forever? I can tell you how you're going to live forever. Just accept Jesus as your Savior and you'll live forever. Well, I got news for you. You're going to live forever somewhere, whether you're saved or you're lost. Now, when you're lost, you're already dead. We have passed from death unto life when we know the Savior. You see, you're already dead. And they said, would to God that we had died in the land of Egypt. Now listen, down here in verses 29 through 35, they're fixing to get their wish. God's going to tell them, you'll never go over there. I'm going to kill every one of you right here below the age of 20 years old. I mean, above the age of 20 years old. You're never going to go over there. Be careful what you wish for. But here's Moses. Here's the pastor. Here's the associate pastor. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were with them that searched the land, rent their clothes. Man, they went over there and they knew who they served. They knew who they served. Moses said, would you kill the whole bunch just because of a bunch of bad seeds? And God said, sure will. Sure will. Say, how could God do such things as He does? Because He is God. When you get to be God, you get to make the decisions. As long as we're us, we don't get to make those decisions. So here they were, standing on the banks. And yet it would be, 38 more years before they got to go in. Till that whole bunch died. And God said, you'll just drop in the wilderness Your carcasses will rot where they fall. And folks, that's what's happening to us. Listen, if we got what we deserve, we'd all be out here. We'd all be out back. That's all we deserve. But we know Jesus. Folks, we got it made. There are those in the world today that live after the flesh and they think they've got it made, but yet the end is not yet. And there are so many people today, listen, so many people in today's church that says we can't do this because there are Canaanites and Amalekites and the Hittites and the Jebusites. We can't do it. We're not able to. God, you see, they said they dwell in the north. They dwell by the coastline. They dwell in the mountains. Everywhere we go, they're there to oppose us. Now, there's some truth in this. But through prayer, to the saved person, through prayer, there's victory. That's why we sing Victory in Jesus. Now that victory in Jesus doesn't just necessarily mean that He came and He died to save us and we got saved. That means we've got victory in Jesus every day. Now, I'm going to give you this before we go. And you're right, Jerry. We look at our wives and listen, women, and if y'all notice, women and men are different. You know how you can tell a man from a woman? Now, we're not getting dirty here. You know how to tell a man from a woman? Look at their keychain. We carry 3 keys and they've got a thing this long.
That's not true in my culture, so you know.
Men and women are different. Men and women have a hard life because of Eve. And so many things. And Jerry, you're right. Sometimes you don't even want to look at her. You just cut your eyes and you think, what's wrong with her? Why is she mad at me? You laugh, Mary. You're a woman too. Men, we all go through this. What's wrong with her? And there's nothing wrong. But we think, man, she's got Jebusites and Canaanites and Hittites and Amorites on her side. I can't win, but you can, because that's your helpmate. She's there for you. She's there to help you. We're to lift each other up as Moses, as Aaron and Hur lifted up the arms of Moses and they prevailed in battle. That's what she's here for, guys. They lift our arms up. And sometimes we have to lift them up a little bit too. And the problem is with men, we don't know to do that. We're selfish. I'm the man. I'm Fred Flintstone. You're Wilma. I can't defeat the Canaanites. This week has been a good week. Amen? We're all here. Nobody's in the hospital. I didn't have to go preach a funeral this week. Things are good. Life's good. But there's always something you're up against. You got to have glasses. You got to have hearing aids. You've got to have crutches. You've got to have Band-Aids. You've got to... Listen. There is always something that's going to be going on. And I give Satan far too much credit. I say, look what the devil is doing to me. He's after me this week, and sometimes he is, and sometimes it's just old Phil. Just me. Poor old me. Poor old me. Oh, poor. And we're all this way. We're all this way. It is time for the church of God to stand upon its feet and say, we will conquer this land as long as we're in the wilderness. We will conquer this land. There's no Hittites, there's no Amorites, there's no Jebusites, there's no Canaanites that can defeat us because we have the banner of grace on our side.